Why did showing undeniable timestamp proof to your partner just, completely ruin your entire weekend?
Yeah, it never goes the way we think it will.
Right. Well, welcome to our channel to listen to today's deep dive. Today, we are exploring this paradox that kind of defies every logical instinct we have.
Yeah.
We're looking at why being completely 100% objectively right about something can somehow make a situation entirely worse.
It is such a fascinating trap because, we operate under this immense cultural illusion that human interactions are that they're like engineering problems or math equations.
But there's always a right answer.
Exactly. We are conditioned from a very young age through school and tests and grades to believe that there is a correct answer and an incorrect answer.
Right.
And so the underlying assumption we carry into adulthood is that if we have the facts on our side, if we are factually accurate, the universe will naturally align in our favor. Like the friction will just disappear because the truth is self-evident.
The math equation approach is so comforting, though. It's just clean. I mean, if you and I have a dispute, I just pull out the spreadsheet or the email thread or the literal receipts, and I point to the data.
Right, you present the evidence.
Yeah, I present the evidence, you look at the evidence, you recognize the undeniable truth, and we move on. We treat our relationships like a peer-reviewed study.
Which is a terrible strategy for human connection.
It really is. But if you are driving to work right now and you're dreading a meeting with a difficult coworker, or maybe you're trying to figure out why a tiny argument with a friend last night escalated into a full-blown Cold War, keep listening. This deep dive is going to fundamentally dismantle the idea of what it means to, win a disagreement.
Because the uncomfortable reality we have to confront today is that winning an argument often guarantees that you lose something significantly more important. You can be absolutely pristine in your timeline of events, You can be flawlessly accurate about what was said and when it was said, and still be completely wrong about what the human being sitting across from you actually needs in that exact moment.
Let's anchor this in the core story from our source material.
Yeah.
Because this anecdote is going to sound painfully familiar to anyone who has ever owned a smartphone.
Oh, absolutely. The text message incident.
Yes, the text message incident. So we have two friends who get into a disagreement over something that happened a few days prior. And to be clear, we aren't talking about a major betrayal here.
Right, not a massive scandal.
No, not stolen money or a ruined wedding or anything. We are talking about a minor, seemingly insignificant detail about how a past conversation played out. It's a garden variety memory mismatch. Friend A remembers the conversation happening one way, and friend B remembers it differently.
Which, by the way, is the baseline of almost all human interaction. Our memories are incredibly flawed. They're highly subjective reconstruction machines, not video recorders. Mm-hmm. So a memory mismatch is practically inevitable.
But see, friend A realizes she doesn't have to rely on her subjective reconstruction machine. She has the literal text messages on her phone.
The Holy Grail.
Exactly. The conversation happened over text. So she has the time-stamped objective proof of exactly who said what and in what order. She has the receipts.
So she does what any of us would do.
Right. She pulls out her phone, scrolls to the message thread, and shows her friend the screen. In her head, she is popping the champagne. The debate is over. Case closed.
She completely expects the other person's brain to process that data like a computer.
Like beep boop, error corrected.
Exactly. New data enters, old data is overwritten. She expects friend B to look at the screen and say, wow, you were completely right. My memory was faulty. Thank you for clearing that up.
That is exactly what she expected. And it's the exact opposite of what actually happened.
Of course it is.
Instead of agreeing, friend B digs her heels in harder.
Yeah.
She looks at the literal text messages, the objective reality on the glowing screen, and still disagrees.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It's totally wild. Mm-hmm. She insists she remembers the vibe of the conversation differently, or that the texts don't capture the real context. So friend A, who is completely baffled by this denial of reality, just keeps explaining.
Because she has the proof.
Right. She points at the screen. She reads the messages out loud. She explains the timeline again. She probably gets a little louder and a little more intense with every repetition, desperately trying to force her friend to acknowledge the facts.
That desperation is such a fascinating psychological response. When you hold the physical proof in your hand and the other person rejects it, you experience this massive cognitive dissonance.
Like your brain just short circuits.
Exactly. Your brain cannot process their refusal to see reality, so your instinct is to increase the volume and the pressure. You think, maybe I just haven't explained the evidence clearly enough, so you become relentless.
And her relentless push for accuracy created an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
Because friend B didn't finally break down and admit defeat. She didn't yield to the logic.
No, she shut down.
She completely shut down, built a wall, and the two friends didn't speak for 2 entire days. A friendship went into a deep freeze over a tiny disagreement about a minor detail from days ago. And the punchline to this whole tragedy, the original disagreement was never even solved.
That is the core of the paradox we are unpacking today. Technically, friend A was undeniably right.
She had the facts.
She possessed the objective data, but she completely and utterly lost the conversation. She won the data point and lost the friendship for 48 hours. This perfectly illustrates a phenomenon the source material identifies as the trap of righteousness.
The trap of righteousness. I love that term. Why does possessing the right answer detonate the entire situation?
Because the state of being right is chemically and psychologically intoxicating.
Oh, wow. Intoxicating.
Truly, when we are absolutely certain that we are factually correct, it triggers a dangerous shift in our internal permissions. It gives us a false sense of moral authority. We suddenly feel justified in behaving poorly.
Because we have the truth on our side.
Right. Because we are holding the shield of truth, we subconsciously believe we have a license to be angry, to dismiss the other person's perspective, to interrupt them, or to adopt this incredibly smug, condescending tone. We feel entitled to just keep hammering away at the other person until they submit to our reality.
You know, we treat casual disagreements in our living rooms and conference rooms exactly like a courtroom trial.
That is the perfect analogy.
We really do. We step into the role of the aggressive prosecutor. We bring out our phone as Exhibit A, we hold it up in a little metaphorical plastic evidence bag, we lay out the timeline, and then we stand back, fold our arms, and wait for the jury to deliver a guilty verdict.
Right. You expect the other person to just bow their head and say, I yield to the prosecution.
Yes, but we forget something crucial.
We forget where we are. In a courtroom, the goal is to establish a singular, objective reality for a third party, the judge or the jury. The prosecutor doesn't care about the defendant's feelings.
Right, they just want to win the case.
Exactly. But in your living room, there is no judge. There is no jury. You are prosecuting the very person you're supposed to be collaborating with. You forget that the person in front of you isn't a defendant on the stand. They are a complex human being with an ego, with insecurities, and most importantly, with an emotional experience of the conversation that is happening right in that very second.
So when I pull out the text messages and shove them in someone's face, I might be proving my point, but I'm also making them feel cornered and humiliated. And I'm ignoring the humiliation because in my head, my facts are justified.
You are falling into the most fatal communication error a person can make, which is assuming that justified facts equal justified behavior.
Justified facts equal justified behavior.
Wow.
Once we are convinced our position is factually correct, we completely stop auditing our own behavior. We stop asking, is my tone helpful right now? We stop asking, is pushing this point actually serving the relationship?
Because we're just blindly focused on the win. Right. You can be 100% right about the chronological facts of a situation, but completely misunderstand the human being experiencing it. You can be right that someone made a mistake, but if your method of proving that mistake strips them of their dignity, you have done massive damage.
Justified facts do not equal justified behavior. I feel like that should be written on a sticky note on every computer monitor in the world. It's like we get so blinded by the glare of our own accuracy that we stop seeing the human being entirely. We prioritize the data over the person.
Which brings us directly to the massive divide between facts and interpretations. Almost all everyday conflict doesn't actually happen at the level of raw facts. It happens in the murky, overlapping space of interpretations.
Our source material breaks this down using a brilliantly simple framework. It separates a single event into 3 distinct types of facts that we constantly blur together.
This part is crucial.
Let's say you and I have a conflict. Fact A is a literal action in the physical world. So, for example, I did not call you back.
Right, an observable action.
Then there's fact B, which is a fact of emotional experience. You felt ignored. And fact C is a contextual reality. I was overwhelmed with work.
The tragedy of human communication is that we struggle immensely to hold multiple conflicting truths at the same time. The uncomfortable reality we have to accept is that fact A, fact B, and fact C can all be entirely 100% true simultaneously.
So all of them are valid.
Exactly. The fact that you are genuinely overwhelmed with work does not cancel out, invalidate, or erase the fact that the other person genuinely experienced the feeling of being ignored.
This is exactly where my brain always short circuits. If a friend comes to me and says, I felt ignored because you didn't call me back, my immediate visceral instinct is to reject their statement.
It's because you feel attacked.
Exactly. I instantly fire back, I didn't ignore you, I was dealing with a massive crisis at work.
Yeah.
I treat their statement about their internal emotional state as a direct accusation against my actions.
You are experiencing one of the most fascinating and destructive cognitive distortions discussed in the material, which is the ghost accusation.
The ghost accusation.
You are responding aggressively to a charge that was never actually spoken.
Let's dissect the ghost accusation, because this is the invisible script ruining so many conversations. Why do we do this? If a friend just says, hey, I was hurt when you didn't call, why does my brain instantly bypass logic and translate that simple statement of feeling into, you intentionally and maliciously hurt me, and you are a fundamentally terrible, selfish person?
To understand the ghost accusation, you really have to look at how the brain processes emotional threats. From an evolutionary standpoint, human beings survived by being part of a tribe.
Right, safety in numbers.
Exactly. Being valued by the tribe meant safety. Being rejected by the tribe meant isolation and ultimately death. Consequently, our brains developed an incredibly sensitive threat detection system for social rejection.
So we're hardwired for this.
We are. When someone presents a negative emotional response to something we did, our amygdala, the fear center of the brain, doesn't just hear a neutral data point about their internal state. It perceives a threat to our social standing, which it interprets as a threat to our survival.
So a minor complaint about a phone call registers in the brain like a rustling in the bushes that might be a tiger.
On a neurological level, the pain of social rejection shares neural pathways with physical pain. So when we hear, I felt ignored, our brain extrapolates wildly to protect us. We assume that if we caused a bad feeling, the other person must think we are a bad person.
We invent the accusation.
We invent the ghost accusation. Someone says, I need you to help out more around the house. And the ghost accusation we hear is, you are a lazy, inadequate partner who is failing this family.
Oh, that hits close to home.
Right. Or a coworker says, I don't think this paragraph flows very well. And the ghost accusation we hear is, you are a terrible writer, you are incompetent, and you are going to get fired. We take a single isolated sentence about a temporary experience, and we instantly inflate it into a permanent, sweeping indictment of our core character.
We turn a minor traffic ticket into a capital murder trial inside our own heads. We're suddenly defending ourselves against a death sentence that no one actually handed down.
Exactly.
And the real tragedy here is what happens to the other person while we are doing this. By rushing to aggressively defend our entire character against a ghost accusation, we make the original problem vanish. The friend who just vulnerably shared, I felt ignored, is now watching me angrily defend my work schedule and my moral integrity.
Their feeling gets completely lost.
It does.
Yeah.
Their feeling isn't just unresolved, it's being compounded. By screaming about how busy I was, I am actively ignoring their feelings about being ignored.
It is a devastating irony. In your desperate, panicked attempt to correct the record and prove that you are not a bad friend, you end up invalidating their reality completely. You prioritize defending your self-image over tending to their emotional experience.
Wow.
The original issue, the missed phone call, is buried under a massive, volatile, secondary conflict about validation, defensiveness, and who is the bigger victim.
It makes you realize how rarely arguments are actually about the topic being discussed. We think we are arguing about the dishes or the phone call or the text message, but we aren't.
We almost never are. If you peel back the layers of defensive posturing and look at the underlying mechanics of conflict, you hit the bedrock of why we fight, which is identity. You aren't defending the fact that you are busy. You are defending who you fundamentally believe you are.
This identity piece is where the source material gets incredibly sharp.
Yeah.
There's a workplace example in the text that I think is going to resonate with literally anyone who has ever held a job.
Oh, the email example.
Yes. Imagine a manager pulls an employee into an office for a quick check-in. The manager says, hey, on this last project, you really need to communicate more clearly with the rest of the team. And the employee, before the manager has even finished the sentence, fires back defensively, but I sent 3 emails.
The employee is providing a perfectly factual answer to a question that was never asked.
The analogy that always comes to mind for me here is a restaurant kitchen. It's like a customer tasting a bowl of soup, calling the chef out and saying, "Excuse me, this soup really needs some salt." And the chef violently throws their towel down and yells, "But I boiled the water."
That is hilarious, but let's make that analogy even messier, because human psychology is messier.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's more like the chef is harboring a deep, secret insecurity that they might be a fraud who doesn't deserve their culinary degree. So when the customer mentions the salt, the chef doesn't just hear feedback on the seasoning. The chef hears, "You are a fraud, you can't cook, and your entire career is a lie."
The ghost accusation again.
Exactly. So they scream about boiling the water because they are desperately trying to prove they possess at least baseline competence.
Yes, you boiled the water, you sent the 3 emails, you are frantically pointing to evidence to prove that you did something, but you are entirely missing the essence of the feedback. The manager didn't say, "You sent 0 emails." They didn't say, "You did no work." They said, "The communication wasn't clear."
The reason the employee instinctively yells about the 3 emails is because their core identity has just registered a massive threat. If your internal narrative is that you are a hardworking, diligent, hyper-competent professional, and someone suggests your communication was lacking, your brain doesn't process that as a minor logistical tweak.
It feels like an attack.
It processes it as a direct attack on your identity. So you scramble for the nearest piece of armor you can find, the fact that you sent 3 emails, and you hold it up as a shield to prove your fundamental competence against the ghost accusation of incompetence.
We do the exact same thing in our romantic relationships all the time. The source points out a dynamic that is so common it's almost a cliche. Partner A says, "I just don't feel like you listen to me when I'm upset." And partner B immediately responds with a transcript.
Memory test.
Yes. Partner B says, "What do you mean? I remember everything you told me yesterday. You said the meeting was at 2, you said your boss was rude, and you said you wanted pasta for dinner." Partner B is aggressively passing a memory test, completely blind to the fact that partner A isn't administering a pop quiz on data retention.
Partner A is talking about emotional presence, and partner B is defending their cognitive function.
Exactly.
Partner B is proving they have a highly functional brain when partner A is desperately asking for a functional heart. And the reason partner B retreats to the data, the memory of the pasta and the meeting time, is because the alternative is terrifying.
The alternative means admitting a flaw.
Exactly. If partner B accepts the feedback, "You are right, I wasn't listening to you, I was checked out," they have to tolerate the discomfort of seeing themselves as a flawed partner.
And egos hate that.
Oh, our egos will go to extraordinary, exhausting lengths to avoid the temporary discomfort of admitting a mistake. We will wage a 3-hour war over text message timestamps just to avoid saying, "I handled that poorly."
I want everyone listening to just take a second and audit their own recent arguments. Notice the exact moment when you start rejecting evidence or when you start minimizing someone else's feelings, simply because accepting them would force you to look in the mirror and say, "I made a mistake," or "I was selfish," or "I judged that unfairly."
It's hard to look at.
It is. Notice when you start aggressively presenting your 3 emails or your memory test results just to protect your ego from a tiny scratch.
Because the moment you can spot yourself doing that, you gain an incredible superpower. You can pause the entire interaction and realize, wait a minute, I'm defending the wrong thing here. I'm fighting a war that doesn't need to be fought.
And realizing what kind of war you're fighting is the perfect transition to a massive conceptual framework from our source. The material argues that a huge percentage of our conflicts happen simply because we don't know how to categorize the conversation we are in.
This is so important.
If you don't know what kind of conversation you're having, you are guaranteed to ruin it.
The framework categorizes all interactions into 4 distinct types of conversations. And the premise is vital. Treating all 4 types like a debate or a problem to be violently hacked apart creates instant friction.
Let's lay out all 4, because missing even one of them throws off the whole dynamic. The source identifies them as, number 1, exchanging information. Number 2, solving a problem. Number 3, making a decision. And number 4, wanting to feel heard.
Let's look at how quickly these can get derailed if you misdiagnose them. Take the first one. Exchanging information. This should be the simplest human interaction. What time is the flight tomorrow? The flight is at 8 a.m. Pure data transfer.
Super simple.
Right. But inject ego into it, and suddenly it's a disaster. What time is the flight? I told you 3 times yesterday it's at 8 a.m. Why don't you ever check the itinerary?
Oh man, I've had that exact fight.
You've just taken a type 1 conversation and turned it into an identity conflict about competence and respect.
Or type 3, making a decision.
Yeah.
Let's say we are trying to decide where to eat dinner. A simple type 3 conversation.
Yeah.
But I want Italian and you want sushi. Instead of just negotiating the decision, my ego gets involved. I think we always get what you want. You are so controlling.
Now it's a completely different conversation.
Suddenly, we aren't talking about dinner anymore. We are having a sprawling argument about power dynamics in our relationship, all because I misdiagnosed the decision-making conversation as an attack on my autonomy.
But the most dangerous and common mix-up, the one that destroys relationships daily, is confusing conversation type 2 and conversation type 4, confusing solving a problem with wanting to feel heard.
This is the trap I have fallen into 1,000 times. Let me paint the picture. My partner comes home after an absolutely brutal day. They drop their bag, they slump on the couch, and they just start venting. Their boss threw them under the bus, their project was delayed, the commute was a nightmare.
They're overloaded.
Exactly. And as someone who loves them, my immediate instinctual response is to spring into action. I want to help. I am putting on my superhero cape. So I start firing off solutions. You need to document what your boss said and take it straight to HR. Let's update your resume tonight and get you out of there. Here is the exact script you should use in your meeting tomorrow.
You're trying to fix it.
I am aggressively trying to solve the problem. But instead of looking relieved, my partner gets visibly annoyed. They cross their arms, they shut down, and they tell me I'm not supporting them at all. And I'm sitting there baffled thinking, I am literally giving you the roadmap to fix your life. Why are you mad at me?
You are baffled because you misdiagnosed the room. You treated the interaction as conversation type 2, solving a problem. You approached it like a mechanic looking at a broken engine.
Right.
But your partner initiated a conversation type 4, wanting to feel heard. When a human being is in a state of acute emotional overwhelm, their prefrontal cortex, the logical planning part of the brain, is essentially offline. They are not looking for a strategist. They are not looking for a consultant. They are looking for a witness to their experience.
A witness, not a mechanic.
Precisely. When you aggressively offer solutions in that moment of vulnerability, you are inadvertently sending a very cold message. You are essentially communicating, your negative emotions are an inconvenience to me. They are a problem that needs to be fixed immediately so we can get back to a baseline where I feel comfortable.
Ouch. That sounds so harsh when you put it like that.
You aren't validating their pain. You are trying to eliminate it because it's messy. Good advice delivered at the wrong emotional time is indistinguishable from bad advice.
That brings us to one of the most painful but necessary concepts we have to talk about the divide between intent and impact. Because when my partner gets mad at my helpful advice, what is my immediate reaction? Defensiveness. I feel betrayed. I yell, but I was only trying to help. I desperately want my good intentions to be the only metric that matters.
This is the crux of so much human misery. When someone points out that our impact was harmful, our ego screams at us to explain our intent. We firmly believe that if our intentions were pure, we should be granted total immunity from the consequences of our actions. We want our inner goodness to erase their outer pain.
But the source material demands a much higher level of emotional maturity. It requires us to hold two conflicting realities in our head at the exact same time. You have to be able to acknowledge your own intent without using it as a shield to deflect the impact.
You have to accept the profound truth that both realities exist independently. You genuinely meant well, you were operating from a place of love, and your actions still caused harm. Your pure intent does not negate their painful impact.
That is a brutal pill to swallow. You meant well, and it still hurt. It requires putting the ego entirely in the back seat. So instead of shouting, but I was just trying to help, and escalating the fight, how do we actually handle that moment?
It takes practice.
A mature response would look like catching yourself and saying, you know what, I really was just trying to jump in and fix things because I hate seeing you stressed, but I can see that throwing solutions at you right now is just making you feel dismissed, and I'm so sorry. I am turning off the problem-solving brain. Tell me more about what your boss said.
Look at the mechanics of what you just did in that hypothetical response. You didn't grovel. You didn't pretend your intent was malicious. You calmly stated your intent. I wanted to fix things, but you immediately subordinated it to their impact. But I see it made you feel dismissed.
Right.
By doing that, you instantly transition the interaction from a defensive type 2 problem-solving debate back to a supportive type 4 listening session. You align with their reality instead of fighting it.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time diagnosing the pathology here. We know the trap of the courtroom mentality. We understand why ghost accusations hijack our amygdala. We recognize the fragility of our ego defending our identity, and we know how to properly diagnose the four conversations. Now let's get deeply tactical. Let's talk about the specific, actionable English phrases the source material provides for de-escalating these moments when the temperature in the room is rising.
The tactical challenge in de-escalation is incredibly delicate. You have to thread a very specific psychological needle. How do you validate the other person's emotional experience and lower their defenses without completely capitulating and admitting that you are factually wrong?
Because, let's remember, the text message incident, you might actually have the facts on your side. We aren't advocating for becoming a doormat who just agrees with everything to keep the peace.
Exactly. We want to prioritize making progress over proving accuracy. The source suggests a phrase that I think is a masterclass in this balance. The phrase is, I see where you're coming from, but I'm not sure I agree.
If we break down the linguistics and the psychology of that single sentence, it's remarkably powerful. The first half, I see where you're coming from, is pure, unadulterated validation.
It's acknowledging their reality.
You are looking the other person in the eye and signaling, I am hearing you. I recognize the internal logic of your argument. I see your emotional state, and I'm not treating you like you are crazy. That alone drops the other person's defensive posture by 50%.
But then the second half acts as a boundary.
Exactly. But I'm not sure I agree. You maintain your own intellectual integrity. You acknowledge their experience without conceding the factual high ground. Contrast that with the default response we usually use. You are wrong.
Oh, yeah.
When you say you are wrong, you initiate a combat sequence. When you say, I'm not sure I agree, you invite a divergence of perspective. It softens the entire architecture of the conversation.
The next phrase the source recommends feels almost like a psychological trick, but it is incredibly effective. I might be wrong about this, but
It's an act of conversational vulnerability.
it really is. By voluntarily leading with the possibility of your own error, you completely disarm the other person. If we are in an argument, your primary objective is to prove that I might be wrong. If I open my mouth and do that work for you, if I say, listen, I might be completely wrong about this timeline, but you suddenly have nothing to aggressively fight against, I have removed the target.
Wow.
I've signaled that we aren't in a winner-takes-all debate. We are in a mutual exploration of what happened.
You are modeling the exact flexibility you want them to display.
Okay.
It lowers the stakes from an identity-threatening courtroom trial back down to a casual conversation.
And then there is the final tactical tool, which sounds like the easiest thing in the world, but in practice, when your heart rate is elevated, it is borderline impossible to execute. The phrase is simply, let me think about that.
The power of the pause.
The power of the pause, not responding immediately when provoked.
Silence is the most underutilized de-escalation tool we have. When we are triggered, when we hear a ghost accusation, adrenaline floods our system. Our biological imperative demands immediate action.
We feel we have to fix it now.
We feel an overwhelming, burning need to correct the record right now. We must defend our character right now. Forcing yourself to say, let me think about that, or I am feeling too defensive to give you a good response right now, acts as a circuit breaker for that adrenaline loop.
It gives your prefrontal cortex time to come back online.
Hold on, I need to jump in and push back on this because I can see a massive pitfall here. If I learn to use the phrase, I need some time to think, every single time I am losing an argument or every time someone holds me accountable for bad behavior, aren't I just weaponizing silence?
That's a really fair point.
The source material specifically emphasizes that we need healthy conflict. We need to be able to stand up for ourselves and set boundaries. If my partner tells me I hurt them and I just say, let me think about it and walk into the other room, I'm dodging accountability.
That is a crucial distinction and a very real danger. You are describing avoidance, not a pause. A tactical pause is only a healthy communication tool if there is a guaranteed return to the conversation.
Okay, so how do we ensure it's not just avoidance?
The mechanism of a healthy pause includes a time limit. It sounds like, I am too heated to have this conversation productively right now. Let me think about this and let's pick it back up after dinner. If you walk away and never bring the issue up again, hoping it just disappears, you are engaging in conflict suppression. And suppressed conflict doesn't evaporate. It ferments into resentment.
So the goal of learning all this isn't to create a frictionless life where we never argue.
Absolutely not. If someone crosses a boundary or treats you unfairly, you must engage in conflict. The objective is to upgrade how you disagree. The goal is to strip the zero-sum winner and loser mentality out of the conflict. You want to shift the ultimate objective from I must destroy your argument and prove my superiority to we need to deeply understand why we are missing each other, even if we still disagree at the end.
You elevate progress over pure clinical accuracy. This brings the entire narrative full circle perfectly. Let's go back to our opening story. The two friends, the minor memory mismatch, the undeniable text messages, and the 2 days of complete silence. How did they actually resolve the Cold War?
Well, according to the source, friend A, the one who had the phone and the proof, eventually broke the silence and reached out to apologize.
But, and this is the vital nuance with it, she didn't apologize for the facts. She didn't pretend her memory was wrong. She still had the messages. She apologized entirely for how she handled the facts.
She took accountability for her intent and her impact. She told her friend, I realized I became far more obsessed with proving I was technically right than I was with understanding why this memory was upsetting you.
And the friend's response was incredibly telling. She didn't demand that friend A admit the texts were fake. She just said, that's all I wanted. She didn't need the objective facts of the universe to change. She just needed to know that her emotional reality was more important to her friend than winning a trivia contest about a Tuesday afternoon.
This specific resolution highlights the deepest philosophical lesson of this entire deep dive, the human obsession with control. Ultimately, the reason we fight so viciously, the reason we hate being misunderstood, is because we desperately want to maintain control over how other people perceive us.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
When someone remembers a shared event differently, or when they interpret our harmless actions negatively, it feels like they are grabbing the pen and writing a script about our lives that we didn't authorize. We argue, we yell, and we present text messages because we want to rip the pen out of their hands and force them to read our authorized biography.
But the brutal truth of adulthood is that we don't have the pen. We never had it. True maturity is recognizing that you have to surrender the remote control to other people's perceptions.
You can't control it.
You can explain your intent perfectly. You can be flawless in your delivery. You can have a mountain of text messages and time-stamped emails, and you can still be entirely misunderstood. You can be the kindest, most factual person in the room, and someone might still construct a negative narrative about you.
You have absolutely zero control over the final outcome of an interaction in someone else's mind. You only have control over how you choose to show up within it. Once you deeply internalize that you cannot force another human being to understand you or agree with you, the frantic panic desperation to win the argument begins to evaporate. You stop fighting for control and start focusing on connection.
It completely reframes our societal definition of what it means to be strong or intelligent. We are fed this toxic idea that the smartest, most powerful person in a room is the one who dominates the debate, the one who never yields an inch, the one who verbally bulldozes everyone else until their opinion is the only one left standing.
But if you look at that behavior through a psychological lens, that rigid, uncompromising defensiveness isn't strength. It is profound fragility. It is the hallmark of an ego that is so weak and brittle that it cannot sustain even a mild challenge to its worldview.
Wow, fragility.
True intelligence and genuine emotional strength is defined by flexibility. It is the curiosity to invite new information that might prove you wrong. It is the profound capability to stop mid-argument and realize, I have been answering the wrong question this entire time.
There is an immense, almost gravitational power in the phrase, I was wrong. The source material points out an example of a manager standing in front of their team and openly admitting they made a terrible strategic call. My initial, conditioned instinct would be to assume the team would lose all respect for a leader who exposes their incompetence. But reality proves the exact opposite.
Because admitting fault builds indestructible trust. When a leader or partner or a friend looks at you and says, I was wrong about that, what they are subconsciously communicating is incredibly reassuring.
Because it shows they're honest.
They are saying, I value the truth and I value our collective success vastly more than I value protecting my own ego. That is an incredibly magnetic quality. It generates massive psychological safety. If you know that the person you are dealing with is secure enough to admit when they are at fault, you feel incredibly safe being vulnerable and honest with them. Humility isn't about thinking less of yourself, it's about thinking about yourself less.
That's a great distinction.
It is possessing a core identity that is secure enough to know that a single mistake or a lost argument doesn't threaten your fundamental worth as a human being.
So as we pack all of this up and carry it into our daily lives, into our meetings, our living rooms, our text message threads, what does this all mean for us? Let's distill the ultimate takeaways. The next time you feel your heart rate spike, before you turn a minor disagreement into a scorched earth courtroom battle, before you whip out your phone to show the undeniable receipts, you need to force yourself to pause and ask two filtering questions.
These questions are life changers.
First, what am I actually trying to accomplish in this exact moment? Am I trying to solve a logistical problem? Am I trying to offer emotional support? Or am I just desperately trying to satisfy my own ego's need to be dominant?
And the second question is the hardest one to answer honestly. What am I willing to lose just to prove that I am right? Because the math of human relationships dictates that sometimes to win the argument on paper, you have to sacrifice the trust, the mutual respect, and the connection. You have to realize that being respected and being understood are entirely different currencies than just being factually correct.
Sometimes winning the argument is the exact mechanism that guarantees you lose the relationship.
Precisely.
Before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing how to handle conflicts externally, how to navigate coworkers, friends, and partners. But I want you to turn this entire framework inward.
Oh, this is a powerful perspective.
Think about your own internal monologue. If we strip away the desperate need to be right with other people, what happens when we apply these concepts to ourselves? When you make a mistake, when you fail at something, do you treat yourself like a defendant in a courtroom? Do you aggressively bring out the evidence of all your past failures, laying them out to prove to yourself that you are fundamentally flawed? Or can you learn to use the power of applause on your own brain? Can you learn to drop the ghost accusations against your own character, stop prosecuting yourself, and just quietly ask, what would actually help me right now? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.